Okay. Okay. So we're recording. So just kind of overviewing what we're gonna go through today. We left the OpenAPI project where we were fetching one cat. We were fetching some different data. At the time, I think I was a little confused about the requirements of the assignment. I thought by fetching, different, like two different data points, they meant you could use one fetch, but just collecting different data from that same fetch. And what I think they actually want is two different fetches. Um, so there's two different ways to do it. One is we can have like buttons or uh, they call them nav links, but it could really just be buttons that trigger a fetch. And we could have a different fetch for each button. And so we're loading different data onto the page from a different fetch from these different buttons, but it's the same page. The other way to do it is having multiple HTML pages that link to each other. And then each of those HTML pages has its own JavaScript file that does a fetch. So you could go to your website and then click on a link, and it'll bring you to a separate HTML page with a separate JavaScript file that does a fetch. And so I'm going to actually show you two different ways to do it. And you can kind of decide which way you would like to implement. But I kind of made an example of how this could be done on my cat API, and I'll kind of walk you through doing the two different strategies for fetching different data. So can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Oh, and really quick, I also after I'm gonna try to like run through this assignment, and then afterwards I'm gonna try to make sure we have some time for just whatever anyone needs. Like we can you all can ask individual questions, and we could, you know, uh I'll be around for just whatever open-ended helping with things. So yeah, I'll try to not spend too long. I always go over time, but yeah. So let's get started. So this is the cat API example. It left off similar to this, but I added another dogs fetch for fetching dogs. And so and then these different buttons. So last time it did a fetch immediately when you load the page and loads a cat to the screen. This time, the update is making these buttons, and so you can fetch a cat or fetch a dog. And each of these buttons is linked to a different fetch. So I can click the fetch cat button, and we fetch a cat. And then I can click the fetch dog button, and it deletes the cat and then fetches a dog. So I think, from my understanding, this would satisfy the requirement of two different fetches, fetching two different sets of data. The data is very similar. We're using the cat API for both of these. The cat API actually gives you cats and dogs. It's technically different. But if you look at the website, the cat API and dog API bring you to the same site. And I think the dog API was like kind of a spin-off of the cat API. So it's mostly the same, the way that you interact with it. And we could pretty much copy and paste a lot of the code for fetching cats, which I did to fetch these dogs. So I'll show you, and I'll also explain to you a little bit of Git stuff, just because I'm going to be doing some Git stuff and might as well talk you through it. So, oh, and also, if anyone has questions at any point, I tend to like really just get into it and ramble. So if anyone wants to stop me, just uh, tell me to stop, and I can clarify something or slow down or whatever. Okay, so what I have here is I have this update, but I want to go back to a version before I made this update. And I can use Git for that, because Git keeps track of all of your commits, and you can actually, one of the key things that's nice about keeping track of your commits is you can go back to different ones, which is basically like reverting your project back to an earlier state. And actually, before I revert to an earlier state, I'll show you the other type of the latest version that I made, which is going to be fetching on different pages, different actual pages. So I'll show you what that looks like. And so I'm going to do a git checkout. And for this, I'm on the main branch and I want to go to the very last, the most recent commit on the main branch. And so that's how I would do it, git checkout main. And so previously I had checked out a previous commit, and now I just checked out main, which goes to the latest commit on the main branch. So this is my most up-to-date version. You can see I did a bunch, like I said, I got carried away with CSS. I did some CSS on this version, but it's pretty similar to the last one, except for the CSS. I have my cats and dogs page, and this is the home page. And then I can click on cats, and it brings me to a different page and then fetches a cat. And you can see in my URL here, it actually changes to /cats. /cats/. And so that's part of how URLs work. Your URL will look like your project structure. So in here, I have my base. This is like my root folder. And you can see in VS Code, your root folder will show right here. So I have a folder called cat API example 2. And in here, I have these 3 files, my index.css, HTML, and README. This is my root level. And when I go to my browser and I delete everything, it goes to the first index.html at my root folder. That's kind of how web servers work. They know how to serve the index.html page. So if you go to the root folder, it'll find your index.html and serve that file. If I were to change the name of this, I think it will stop working. So if I call this like index2, yeah. So now it's confused. It's not going to load up the right page. So index.html is a special name. And it means when you go to that URL at that root level, it'll say, I want to grab that index.html file. Now, these folders inside here, cats and dogs, these are different HTML. There's different HTML files and JavaScript files in each of these folders. And so just like when you're on your terminal and you can navigate to a different, like if I want to go into a folder, I can do cd dogs and then /, and then if there's a subfolder, you can go in there. That's kind of the syntax for how like file paths work. And the same is true for in URLs. So in URLs, in order to get to the dogs folder, I can click this link, which will bring me to /dogs, or I can just go to my URL. And just in the same way as in your terminal, you can navigate into a folder, and then the folders are separated by a slash. In your URL, I could go to this dogs folder. If I go /dogs, that will load up the index.html file in that folder. So that's kind of how these different pages work, how your project structure links up with your URL and with your links. So I can go to these different pages, and each page, so I have an index.html for my home page, and then one for my dogs page, and so dogs, and this has its own JavaScript file right here, which fetches dogs. And then I have my cats page, which has an index.html, and then its own index.js file, which fetches a cat. So basically 2 ways to do it. The other way was I click a button, it's all one HTML page, and I can click different buttons to trigger these fetches for different data. This other way is having multiple HTML pages, which actually are different links on your website. So I'll show you both ways of doing it. We'll start with the button way. And so I'm going to go to Git, and what I want to do is I want I want to check out a previous commit before I made these changes. I want to go back to the commit that I left off on. So I'm going to say git log. You can do git log and it will log out all of your previous commits. If you do -- one line, that will log them out in a more condensed way. So it's the same information, but we're getting a more condensed format. So these are all commit hashes, which unfortunately you can't check out a commit using the commit message. These are the commit messages. You have to check it out using the commit hash, which is just an identifier. It's a number. And so let's see, and this is why it's nice to have good commit messages, because you can look through and see if I want to go back to my project at a previous point. I could have used branches, side note. I didn't, but that would have made sense too. But let's go back to this commit, fetching cat images and loading them into the DOM. I think, oh wait, fetch cat breeds name and breeds description and load them into the, okay. So that's the one that I want probably. I think that's where we left off on. So I'm going to copy that commit hash, and then I'm going to say git checkout, and then paste the commit hash. And now it will have switched. And you can see if I open my project now, files, we're back at a previous state to where I didn't have these other pages yet. And if I look at my website, it's going to look different. So this is the version. I just went back in time by checking out a previous commit. It's going to give me some issues if I try to do new commits while I have this commit checked out, because it'll be like, like when there's a movie and someone goes back in time and they meet their mom or something, and then they were never born. That same type of thing can happen in Git, where you don't want to go back in time and then rewrite your history without checking out a new branch. So I'm going to check out a new branch. I'm going to say git checkout, and I'll call this, I don't know, lesson. Oh, git checkout -b lesson. So now that I have a new branch, I can do more commits, and it won't try to overwrite my other commits. So I can still get to my future branches or future commits from that main branch. So let's get to coding. I'm going to make a button that fetches these cats. So right now, if I look in my index.js file, there's a fetch call. And if you were here for my last session, or you watch the recording, this is exactly where we left off. We are fetching a cat. We're doing .then, return .json, and with these .thens, the syntax gets a little crazy, but that's just how it goes. Here we are doing a bunch of DOM stuff. So we're selecting the specific cat data we want out of this request. And then we're loading it into the DOM after we create elements and stuff. And so what I want to do is I want to take this fetch call, and I want it to only fetch when I press a button. So I'll go in here and I'll say button. I'll give it an ID of git cat, and I'll just say, or let's say fetch cat. Fetch cat, and then I can put in this is the text that displays to the user in the actual button, fetch cat, and we can see that here, fetch cat. So we want to link this button. Right now it doesn't do anything. We want to link this button to where when I click it, it does that fetch. And it's actually pretty simple. First, we need to get the button using a selector, a DOM selector. So I'm going to say const fetch cat button. This can be any name you want, remember, because we're just making a variable. Document dot, and I could do query selector or get element by ID. I'll do get element by ID. And then we need to pass in the ID of this button, which I put as cat container. Or sorry, cat container is the container we load the cat into. The button is fetch cat. And for this type of thing, I like to copy So I'll select, or I'll highlight it, copy and paste. And that just makes sure I don't accidentally have like a typo. Like I don't, because when you're doing a DOM selector, I see over and over, it's just very common that you accidentally say fetch cats, or, if you have a capital here or whatever, if there's a slight difference in this, it'll not get your button that you want. And just to make sure that we're doing it, I'm going to do console.log fetch cat button. It's going to show up in my console here. Yep, fetch cat button. And I'm going to get rid of these other console logs for now. So we selected our fetch cat button, and now with this button, we want to listen for when the user clicks it. And so we do that by adding an event listener. So we can do fetch cat button dot add event listener. We're listening for a click event. And then, so add event listener, if you haven't seen it, you can put it on any HTML element and then run some code based on some user interaction. And so you can do on click or on, let's see, we can see a list of them here. Close, change, drag, drop, key down, key press. So there's all these different events. And so we want to listen for when the user clicks the button. And then this second argument in here can be an arrow function, or can be any type of function that has the data, or that has the code that we want to run when the user clicks the button. So I'm going to copy all of this fetch code, the entire thing, and just paste it in there. And that should do it. So now we have an arrow function that has all of our fetch kind of, code, everything for fetching a cat and loading it into the page. We just put it all inside this event listener for the button click. So now it's not going to fetch a cat until I click the button, and then it will. So it fetches a cat, and then I can click it again, and it should fetch a new cat. Oh, yep. Okay. So it fetches a new cat. It doesn't clear out the original cat, so I can keep fetching new cats. The way to fix that is we have this cat container that we're loading cats into. And if we want to clear it before we load the new cat in, then I can go down here and I can say, in this fetch, once we receive the new data, I'm going to say cat container dot inner HTML equals an empty string. Clear out cat container, or clear out previous cat. So now every time I fetch, it should fetch a new cat and clear out the old cat. So there's our button for fetching a cat. And let's do a git commit. So git add, you could do dot or -a. They're very similar. I'll do git add dot, git commit -m, and I'll say fetching a cat from button press. Okay. So now that we linked this fetch for the cat to a button, we could put a new button for fetching a dog, and then fetch a dog when we press that button. And it's pretty simple. It's pretty much exactly what you'd think. So I'm going to duplicate this button. I'm going to call this one fetch dog, change the ID, fetch dog. And just to kind of make the rest of this make sense, I'm going to, instead of saying cats, I'm going to say cats and dogs. Because now that we're going to be fetching cats and dogs, I want to update this stuff. So my cool cat site is the title. I'm going to change this to my cool cat and dog site. The cat container, Well, we're gonna fill this with either a cat or a dog. So I'm gonna call this cat or dog container. And then because I changed the ID of this, it's gonna mess up this right here, where I have my cat container get element by ID cat container. I just changed the name of that to cat or dog container. And so I'm just gonna paste that, or sorry, I'm gonna paste that cat or dog container. And now everything should be working the same for cats. And just to try it out, fetch cat. Yep, we can still fetch a cat. If I click fetch dog, we haven't linked that up to do anything, so it's not going to do anything yet. And really quick, I have cats and dogs, and then the buttons are switched to different sides. So just because it looks better, I'm going to have the cat button on the side, on this side. Okay, so now we want to add the logic for fetching a dog. And I'm just gonna basically copy and paste this whole fetch cat button logic and change everything to dog instead. I also, so here we're getting the fetch cat button. I'm gonna get the dog button too. So fetch dog button. The ID should be fetch dog. And again, I always console.log when I select a new DOM element. Console.log fetch dog button and just make sure, yep, it's showing up. So now we have our two different fetches. This one is for fetch a cat. And then we're going to have a very similar thing for fetch a dog. And in reality, if you're using a different API, it might not be exactly the same. You're going to have to find a new, you're going to want to look at this URL. And if you saw my last session, I talked a little bit about how URLs work, looking at the docs for an API and learning how to, kind of adjust your URL, which will get different data. Basically, for this example, this is one of the things that might change depending on your API. You just want to put a different URL here that you get from your API that is going to get different data. For me, I'm gonna go and so I have my fetch for cat data, but I want to fetch dog data now. So last time I had the cat API, this time I have the dog API. So I'm just going to go to documentation. And as you can see, the documentation is taking me to the cat API. So it's actually the same kind of thing, but then there's this for the dog API. The dog API is the same API structure as the cat API, so please use the same documentation. So everything's going to be just about exactly the same for fetching a dog. And your code replace the API reference from api.thecatapi.com with api.thedogAPI.com. So basically, I'm just going to replace cat with dog in the URL, and everything else should be basically exactly the same. So in my URL here, I have the cat API. I'm going to change this to the dog API. And there's one other thing. My API key for the cat API is going to be different than for the dog API. That's just, the specific API here, they use a different API key for the dog API. So I already got my API key for the dog API. I said, get API key, get your API key, click that, enter your stuff. So I already did that for the dog API and I got that URL or the key for it. And so I'm going to have to put that other key in here. In order to make that happen, I'm going to do, I don't feel like going to my email to find it. I just want to go to the URL that I had in my other branch. And so what I'm going to do is I'm gonna do some fancy Git stuff to find that URL that has my API key. So I'm gonna say git stash. Git stash is like if you want to check out different commits, but you've already made changes, Git will complain. If I were to do a git checkout and try to check out a different branch or a different commit, Git might be like, hey, you have unsaved or uncommitted changes. And so git stash will allow you to stash those changes and then recover them once we've like done our thing. So I did git stash, and you can see the dog's stuff is gone. So all the changes I just made are gone. They didn't disappear, they're in the stash. So I can recover them. But I'm gonna check out git checkout main. So I'm gonna go back to my main branch, find this dog's URL here, find the API key, copy it, and then I'll go back. So I'm gonna say git, and I forgot the name of the branch. So I'm gonna say git branch. It'll tell us the name of our branch. It's called lesson. So I'm gonna say git checkout lesson. And then I stashed my changes. And so now I want to recover them from the stash. And the way you do that is git stash pop. And now I should have, this is showing me an out of date version of the file. Because I did git stash pop, it now has the new version of the file, and the one I'm viewing is not the up-to-date version. So I'm going to close out of that, and this version is the one that has my latest updates. So we have the cat and dog button. That was just some fancy Git stuff, because I'm not expecting you all to remember all of what I just did, but I want you to kind of get to see, like in action, what kind of cool things Git allows you to do. It allows you to, kind of travel through time, go to different kind of parts of your code base. And it's nice for that. So I just went to a different Git branch, copied my API key for the dog API, pasted it in there, and now I should be able to fetch a dog. Let's see. It could be that I didn't. Oh, this is fetch cat button. So I need to change this to fetch dog button, and we're going to see if it fetches a dog. Oh, okay. I was doing some debugging, and I have a breakpoint set, which if you haven't seen this yet, check it out. Look up debugging in Chrome or DevTools, whatever browser you use. This is called a debugger, and you can actually walk through code as it executes and see the value of everything. Debugging is awesome in this way. If you haven't done it, I'm not gonna, I could do a separate lecture on that, but I don't want to get distracted. So we're fetching a dog, and that's great. So that's basically the gist of it. I changed my URL, and now all the rest of the way that I handled the data that I got back is pretty much exactly the same, because the cat API gives us almost the same data for the dog API. But you're going to need to make sure that you're handling this data that you get back from this different URL according to whatever that data looks like. And for this case, the cat data and dog data looks almost exactly the same. But I'm going to change these names. So everywhere where I have cat here, just I'm going to rename the variables and stuff. So for the most part, it's not going to matter what they're called, just for our own understanding of what our code is doing, changing the variable names from cat to dog. And the way I did a multi-select like that, so I copied some text, and you can press Command D or Control D on Windows, I think. And then it'll highlight the next, it'll put another cursor on the next bit of text that matches whatever you have highlighted. So I'm just highlighting cat and then selecting all the cat things. I'm gonna stop early because catch matches that pattern too. And so I don't want to select that too, because I'm gonna, now that I have all these cursors, I can type dog, and this is changing all these things at once. Many cursors at once. I'm changing all the cats to dog. So that didn't really do anything. It just changed our variable names to make a little more sense. Okay, that's not working. Let's see. I'll open the console. Fetch dog, not working. It's not showing us any information about why it's not working. But there's that there. I can check in my network tab and see. Okay, so I am still getting an answer back with my dog information. Let's see what changed. Oh, okay, so I'm saying dog container dot append child. I'm guessing I need to change this. We change this to cat or dog container, so I'm going to change this container to cat cat container. Okay, here's another way to rename something. Everywhere where I have cat container, I can right click and do rename symbol, which I have mapped to the hotkey Command R. You can change that to whatever you want. This will rename your variable, and it'll make sure that if you have like a comment or like something else that has that same text in it, it won't affect it. It'll only affect every instance of this variable, and it'll do it for every file in your code base. So I'm going to change cat container to cat or dog container. And you can see right here, I have cat container. If I hit enter, it'll change that, cat or dog container. So when you rename a variable, the rest of your code will be referencing an outdated version of that variable unless you do something like that. So that's just a way to rename a variable and not have to manually go through and make sure that you're changing it everywhere. So now I have cat or dog container referenced. And I think the problem with why I wasn't getting a dog showing up here, because I was getting the API response back that I expected. I need to change dog container here to cat or dog container. So now when I fetch dog, I expect, no, still not working. Okay, so I am getting a response back. Let's see, what else could it be? Cat or dog container dot append child. Let's see. Let's see if fetch cat is working. Okay, so fetch cat is working. Okay, actually, this would be a good chance to do the debugger. I'll show you how to do that. So I'm going to open up my my sources tab. Sources will show you all of your code, your JavaScript. And then I can set a point where I want it to stop the code. So, and then we can like step through as the computer is executing each line of code and see what all the variables are at that point. And so I'm going to set a breakpoint here at line 53, and I can zoom in if that's small. So this is my code. For some reason, we're not seeing a dog, and I want to figure that out. So I'm going to set a breakpoint here, which you can do by clicking on the line number. And now our code will stop whenever we get to this point. And it'll look weird. It'll look like our app, like, or our website, like froze. It'll look confusing, but you'll see what happens. So I set a breakpoint. Our code's going to stop right there, and then we can walk through and see what's going wrong. And when this code runs is when it'll stop. The code runs when I hit the fetch dog button, right? Because I'm listening for a click on the fetch dog button, and then all this code will run. So I'm going to click the fetch dog button, and we're going to expect it'll stop executing the code on this line. Fetch dog, and there we go. So we're now in like debugger mode. It says paused in debugger. You can play, which will continue as if we weren't stopped. You can do step over, which it has these different controls, and you can see one of the most common ones you'll use is step over, which steps to the next line of code. And then they might show up in different places on your terminal or your console here, but these are the same buttons. So continue up here or here, step over up here or right here, step into. This is if you call, so if in your code you call a function, step into will go into that function, whereas step over will just skip the function and go to the next call in the same line of code. And if none of that makes sense, it should once I start stepping through. So I'll click the step over button. So we're stopped right here at this line of code, right? So I'm going to hit the step over button. Oh. Okay, so it just continued as if I didn't step over. I don't know why that happened. Let's try that again. Fetch dog. We're stopped in the debugger. I'm going to hit the step over button. Okay, it stopped again. So I'm thinking there might even be something wrong with this dog container right here. Fetch dog. I'm going to hover over the dog container. Oh. It usually, I don't know why. Usually it'll display, yeah, you can hover over a variable and it'll show the content of that variable. So if I hover over one of these, fetch cat button, dog or cat container, any variable, you can see the value of it at this point in time in my code execution. And I'm guessing dog container doesn't exist. And that would make sense because I named it cat or dog container. So that's the problem. The debugger kind of helped me. Right here, we're calling this cat or dog container. Let's try. There we go. Okay, so we debugged it. We figured out what was wrong. We're getting undefined showing here. So that's another sign that our dog data has like a discrepancy from our cat data. So as we're getting these, you know, we're drilling into this data and finding the different properties we want. One of them is showing up as undefined. And which one is that? Well, that is, we're getting our breed name. So in here we have, for the dog, we have data, breeds, name. So we're getting our breed name, that's fine. Our breed's description isn't showing up. So our image is loading fine. Our breed name is working fine. Our breeds.description is showing up as blank or undefined, which clearly there's something wrong there. So what I'll do is we could do a console.log and see why that's not working. I might as well do the debugger because debugging is awesome. So I'll show you again how we would do that. So I want to see why this is ending up as undefined. And so I will put a breakpoint right there. I'll hit fetch dog. It'll stop all my code. And as you can see, it prints out all this stuff. These are the values of all these variables at this point in time. So breed description equals data, and I can hover over it to see the value of that. This is the data we got back from the dog API. Dot breeds. So this is the breed information. Dot description is undefined. So this breeds array, which it's still an array, it says right there, it does not have a description. The cat's API is giving us a description. The dog API is not. And so I want to find some other data. Let's go with temperament. It's similar to the breed description. So this is basically what I'm saying is there's a difference between the response we got back from the cat API and the dog API. The cat API has a description for the breed. The dog API does not. And so we're getting undefined there. So I want to just change what variable this is, and I can look at the data. I can do it through console log like I showed previously, but we can also look in the debugger and see the value of this is doesn't have a description in this breed information. It does have a temperament, which I want. So I'm gonna do temperament. I'm gonna go over to my code. And by the way, you can change your code here. It'll change it on this instance of your browser, which is fine. And then if you reload your browser, it'll reset it back to what you had in VS Code. So this is a separate copy of your code that is running in your browser. I could change it in here, but it wouldn't save. So I want to change it in VS Code. So data, breeds, description, I'm going to change that to temperament. And instead of calling this variable breed description, I'm going to call it temperament. The multi-select temperament. There we go. And I'm going to continue. So we're pausing the debugger. I just want to continue. I'll leave that breakpoint and we can see what happens. So we're going to stop the breakpoint again. And this time, if I hover over data breeds temperament, we'll see, yep. So before this was showing undefined when we were just getting the description. Now we're getting some information. And so if I continue, it should load this to the page and you can see this is now the temperament, the dog's temperament. It's not showing up as undefined. So with the cat and dog API, the data we got back was almost the same, but because it wasn't, we weren't getting the description. We had to figure out how to change this code in order to get a different value we want. And this could be anything you want. I decided to go with the temperament. Cool, so now we can fetch dogs and we can get the breed name and the temperament in an image. That's basically it. That is adding a second data point using a separate fetch, and the user can click a button to get the different data. So I can fetch cat or fetch dog, and it'll get different data and do a different fetch using a different URL for each of these. So I'll do a git add dot git commit -m, and I'll say fetching cats and, or let's say cats or dogs using buttons. Okay, so that is one way to do two different fetches, like the requirement says in the assignment, is to do two different fetches. We can have a fetch linked up to each button with a different URL, and then each button is going to fetch different data and load different data to your DOM. Here, I decided to load them both into the same container. You can choose to do that, or you can choose to have separate containers. You know, we could make it so that it could fetch a cat and then a dog and display them side by side in different containers. It would be up to you to decide how you want to do that. Okay, so now I'm going to show you the other way of doing this, which is using links to actually go to different pages in your website and fetch a cat or a dog based on what page you're on. And before I launch into that, how's everyone feeling? I want to do a check to make sure everyone's at least following along to some degree, or if anyone needs clarification or anything.
Following along for sure. It's a lot.
Cool.
Thanks.
Yeah, I know it's a lot. I'm going fast because I always take a long time with my lectures. But the good news is there's a recording, and if anyone like needs extra clarification or needs to like see it over again, feel free to, you know, always watch the recording. But I don't know. How is it working for everyone? I'm trying to go a little bit faster this time. It may or may not be what everyone wants. I noticed my lectures tend to go for like 2 hours sometimes.
No, it's good. I mean,
Okay.
the recording we can reference back. So thank you.
Yeah, I want to cover everything I need to cover. And so there's a balance between, you know, making sure I'm taking my time with it and making sure that we are covering all the material. So this time, try and just doing a speed run. So, okay. Let's make some new changes. We're gonna change this to fetching cats or dogs based on our on a link, and we're gonna have different HTML pages for fetching cats and dogs. And so if you haven't seen that before, or if you haven't seen like linking to different pages, I'll show you really quick what that looks like. So first of all this stuff here, I'm just gonna say, I'm gonna call this like my reference.js, and we're not even gonna use this file anymore. I'm gonna have to copy and paste some of this code from it, the fetches, but for right now, I want to get rid of that. And I'm just gonna do a new index.js. Get rid of these buttons. We could keep, or actually we don't need the cat or dog container either. So I'm gonna get rid of all that stuff. And let's see. I'm going to, yeah, I'm gonna show a little demo of how you can link to a different HTML page. So I'm gonna make an anchor tag. And an anchor tag is a link in HTML. And we can link to a different website here. So I could go to like, you know, whatever website I want. You know, I could go to google.com, copy that URL, put that in here, and then say, go to Google. If I, oh, and that's showing up as our link is not a good color for the page. Side note, if you bring up your dev tools and you click on this little guy, you can hover over different elements and see information about them. It's this icon right here. It might be a different icon on a different browser. This is what it looks like in Chrome. This will allow you to hover over different elements and see information about them. If I hover over this, it'll tell me information about the accessibility, and it tells me the contrast. And you can see contrast is 4.1, and then there's a little like error sign, the exclamation point with the circle. That's basically saying our like accessibility is like your score for how, I mean, there's a variety of things that go into it, but being able to make your website accessible to many types of people. And for this, our contrast on this link in the background is very low. And we can see it's actually giving us an accessibility rating of very low. The contrast is not big enough. People can't read that, is what that's saying. So, and I didn't need to check that. You know, we can already tell that's kind of hard to read. But that is one way to like check the elements on your page and see, is the contrast okay between the text and the background? It's not right there. So I'm going to change that. I'm going to go to my CSS and I'm going to say anchor tags. I'm going to say the color is, maybe I'll do the same color as the text color. Maybe I'll do a blue. I'll do like a light blue. Just to kind of differentiate it so we know it's a link. Okay. Okay, so I made this, sorry, I'm getting distracted. I made this link right here, this anchor tag. And it says go to Google, and I linked google.com. If I click on this, it'll bring me to google.com. So an anchor tag stores a link to any other website you want, or a link within your own website to a different page. And so I can say I want a different page, and let's call this cats, because that's what we're gonna want to do anyways. And I'll say, instead of going to a different website, so the website, if you're doing a different one, you have to do the full URL. If you just want to do a different page within your own website, you can do a slash, and then the name of the new HTML file or the folder that the HTML file is in. So I'm going to call this cats. We could actually do lowercase cats. So now this is going to be a link that's internal. It's going to link within my own website. If I click on this, it'll change my URL to /cats, but I don't have a /cats HTML file to link to, and so it's going to complain, cannot get cats. And get is all capitals right there. It's actually talking about an HTTP request, which we talked about last time. A GET request is what your browser uses to basically interact with all the other websites in the world. So we cannot get /cats because we don't have an HTML file to link to. So I can make a new file called cats.html. And maybe I'll just copy my other one because it's going to be a different page in the same website. It's going to be very similar. So I'm going to have it, the title of this is going to be, this is no longer the title of my website. This is the title of this specific page on my website. I'm going to say my cool cat site or cat page. How about? And this will show up in your tab up here. In case you were wondering, like the title of your website, it shows up in a couple different places. It shows up in the Google search results. And it also shows up in the tab up here. So if I go to /cats, oh, it's not working. Oh, I need to put this, okay. I wasn't sure if this would work. It could be that I need an actual cats folder. I'll have to troubleshoot and figure out if you actually need to put it in its own folder. But if that's the way that I learned how to do it. So that's how I'm going to do it. Make a new folder with the name of that page, put an index.html file in there. And then when you go to that URL, so now we're at /cats, and it's loading up this HTML file for cats. It looks the same, but I could say cats, and we can see now we're on /cats. It's loading up this HTML. If I go back, cats and dogs, this is loading up my homepage. So they're looking almost the same right now, but if I click this button, it'll link me to my other HTML file in this folder called cats. So that's how links work when you're wanting to create a new page within your own website. And so let's build out this cats page. For one, you can see the background is different. That's because none of our CSS is linked. Our CSS right here, it's going to be looking in this same folder, this cats folder, and I don't have a CSS file for this cats folder, but I'm just going to keep all my CSS for all pages in this index.css file here. And this is, in order to link this to that file, I need to do .. which says, if you know how to navigate in the terminal a little bit, you can do CD and then change directory. .. means go back one directory. And so it's the same in here. And again, directory means folder. People who program like to have different names for everything. And so, yeah, directory, same thing as folder. So I'm saying go back one folder. That's what .. means. If I did .. slash .. slash, that would say go back two folders. So we want to go back one folder to this because we're in the cats folder. We want to go back to the index.css. And now the cats page should actually, yeah. So before my index.css file was actually not linking right. I just have dot. So I have to go .. slash. And now it'll go back one folder to this index.css file and link to it. So we have our same CSS. We have cats. We're going to want this link to be back to the home page. And so again, I can say, well, actually, I'm just going to do slash. Slash will bring you back to your root page, and I'm going to call this home. So now when I click home, it takes me to the home page. And I can actually, I'll go back to my home page, and just to make it more clear, I'll do like a little I'll do a p tag, and I'll say home page. And then I'll go to my cats page and say cats page, just so we can see. So I'm on my home page right now, you can see. If I click cats, brings me to my cats page, fully different HTML files. Home page, cats page, and the URL changes too. So now that we have different HTML, I can actually link this cats HTML page to its own index.js file. And you might see where I'm going with this. Here's where we're gonna fetch cats. And then we're gonna have a fully separate folder for fetching dogs. So we're linking to the cats page. Now this cats page, we're gonna link to our index.js, which I already have that. I just made our index.js file for cats. Now, I'm gonna go back to this reference folder that I have of all of our fetch data, and I'm gonna copy, not the button. We're not gonna use buttons anymore. We're just gonna fetch once you load up that HTML page, and therefore load up the JavaScript in this page. So this JavaScript will run only when we get to this cats page, because this cats page is what links that JavaScript file. So this JavaScript file that we're creating here will run when we go to the cats page. And then we're going to make a separate one for the dogs. And again, I'm just copying and pasting the cat fetch from my reference file. This is just, this is just one way of doing it. I'm just saving the information I made. We're not going to load it into cat or dog container anymore. We're just going to load it into a cat container. And we're not going to have buttons on this new page. So I am going to copy that and say cat or dog container. Instead, I'm just going to say cat container. And then in my index.js, I'm going to make I can get rid of this p tag. That was just to show you this was the cats page. Under my link, under my header for the cats page, I'm going to make a cat container. So I'm going to say div ID equals, and let me make sure that I get the name right. I said cat container here in my JavaScript. So that means I need to make sure I'm getting the right ID here. I'm naming it the right thing, cat container. And honestly, that should do it. Let's see. I'm on my cats page. I'm expecting to see a cat, and I don't. So let's see what's going on. It could be a network problem. Okay, so I am fetching the cats. I can see the response showing up in our network tab. We're not loading it to the page. So it could be a problem with this. Cat container, index.js, cat container. Oh, okay. So the rest of our code, we're referring to cat or dog container when we actually just want to call it cat container. So I could have used the rename a variable thing. That would have come in handy there. But here, I'll just do it now. I'll rename it to cat container. Now, every time we reference that, it'll change all the other references too. So let's check. And yep. Oh, that was an explicit image. I apologize. Okay, we got cats showing up. Perfect. Okay. So that is we're linking to, and if I go home, we're no longer fetching cats. So I'm on my home page, we're not fetching a cat. I click cats and I go to a separate page with a cat showing up. Awesome. So now I want to do the same thing for dogs. So, and I could actually do a commit. Say git add dot git commit dash m make cat page and fetch cat. So separate page for fetching cats. That's awesome. I'm gonna duplicate this for dogs. So I'm just gonna say copy that whole cats folder and paste it. And then I'm just gonna call this dogs. So this index.js file or index.html file will now be linked when we go to /dogs. And so I'm gonna go my cool cat page. Let's call it my cool dog page. Cats, changing it to dogs. Or yeah, dogs. We still want the link to go home, which that is the link to go home to the home page. And then we're not going to call this cat container. We're going to call it dog container. And now in our index.js file, we're going to go back and copy the fetch for the dog. Put it in here. So I replaced, I had the fetch for the cat, and I replaced it with the fetch for the dog. Now up here, cat container, I want to change that to dog container. And let's see. So we're on our cats page, /cats. I can click this link to go home. Oh, I forgot to make a link to the dogs page. But this does give me an opportunity to show you can go to different pages on a website just by typing them into your URL. So if I do /dogs, that'll be the same thing as clicking a link that links to the dogs page. So I'm just going to type in my URL /dogs, and there we go. We're on our dogs page. We're not getting any dogs showing up. So I'm going to guess there's something wrong with this dog container. Yep, cat container. I do that every time, apparently. Mess up the name of the HTML element, which, again, that's a very common mistake. And so I would recommend anytime you're working with DOM elements, just console log them out throughout just to see whether they're showing up is what you want them to. Cool, so we're getting dogs now. So I can go home. Let's add a link to the dogs page now. Copy this link on the home HTML page. Rename that to dogs. So now I can go to cats and it'll fetch a cat. I can go back home. I can go to dogs and it'll fetch a dog. And I can go back home. Okay, there's the pretty much the gist of it. I can delete my reference file because I use that code. Our index.js file here, this is linked to our homepage. Our homepage doesn't need any JavaScript, really. Like we're not doing any JavaScript on our homepage, so I don't even need this index.js file in our homepage. We have specific index.js and index.html files for our cats and dogs pages. For our homepage, we don't need any JavaScript. So now I can go cats, fetch a cat, dogs, fetch a dog. And for your API, if you're doing weather data or coffee or whatever your API is, Star Wars, it's a very similar process where you can go, you could have a link to get, if you're using the Star Wars API, we could have a link to go to Anakin's page or Luke Skywalker or, you know, R2D2 or whatever. You could have a bunch of links to go to different, or just two. Like for this assignment, they only require you to have two. So you'd want to have different pages that fetch different data. In this case, we're fetching cats and dogs. And I didn't do that. I didn't port over my CSS. So from the example at the beginning, I had done a bunch of CSS. I don't necessarily want to write all that CSS because it'll take a bunch of extra time, and I don't think your grade here is really determined by your CSS skills that much. Maybe a little bit, but if anyone wants to see any CSS, I'm happy to do it. I love CSS, but I don't want to get sucked into a rabbit hole. All right. I think that's like, this would be a version of the assignment that you could submit at this point. I would do some CSS to get things looking slightly better. But other than that, it's, I'd say pretty much a complete version of what they want. So I'll do a git commit, git add dot git commit dash m, and I can say, actually, you can see this previous commit I typed in is showing up. I think if I press tab, it'll autocomplete. Oh no. Okay, if I press the up arrow, it'll autocomplete that. So I'm gonna, because I just basically did the same thing for the dog page, I'm just gonna change the last commit message I made, but for dog. Make dog page and fetch dogs. Okay. And let's see, I would do a git push. So I could say git push origin. So if, I'm sure a lot of you have run into this. If you just do git push, Git will complain. So you have to do git push and then specify the branch you want to push to. You could do git push origin, and then I'm on lesson 7, and you can see that down here, the lesson 7 branch. Or sorry, not lesson 7, just lesson. Don't know where I got 7 from, but so I could push to a branch on GitHub called lesson. This would create a new branch called lesson on GitHub, because I have a version that I made on my computer called lesson. This would create a new one on GitHub. GitHub is the origin. So this would push to a new branch on GitHub called lesson, or I could push to the main branch. So I could push from my lesson branch on my computer to the main branch on GitHub if you want. It's good to have the branches kind of aligned so that your branches on your computer are, you know, linking to the same ones of the same name on GitHub. So I would do git push origin lesson. And now if I were to go to GitHub, it'll, oh, GitHub, here's my project. I have my main branch. Lesson 7 had recent pushes 17 seconds ago, so I could do a new pull request from that branch to the main branch. If you want to see a different branch, you can click on this. I'm on my main branch looking at that. I could go to my lesson branch. It's 6 commits ahead of main, so all those commits that I just did to change it, they're ahead of the main branch. If I did a pull request, there would probably be merge conflicts, which I know Nicole mentioned she dealt with. Merge conflicts in Git are a whole thing, and they will cause you headaches, but I'm not even going to get into it. If anyone is struggling with Git, just as a side note, Git causes problems for everyone. It's just part of the process of learning to code is struggling with Git. It's just everyone does, and that's just how it is. So I apologize because it's frustrating to learn. But you'll get there. Okay. There's my lesson. So I'll stop it there. And if anyone has questions, I can